Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 21st of January 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comments. Coming up in the show, Spartacus Legends is the second game in Australia to get the R18+ rating. BioShock Infinite religious content highly altered after feedback from staff members with a religious persuasion. Gas-powered games in studio layoffs. And 2 pro gamers banned from participation in the League of Legends Championship Series after gross violations of the Summoner's Code. It's been announced that a free-to-play brawler game by the name of Spartacus Legends will be the second game in Australia to get the R18+ rating shortly after the legislation was changed in the country at the start of this year. It follows on after the first game, Ninja Gaiden Razor's Edge, which is of course the Wii U version of Ninja Gaiden 3, and is based on the popular television series Spartacus Blood and Sand. It's rumored that Mortal Kombat 9 and Left 4 Dead 2 are also in the running for an R18+ classification. Now, prior to this, it was in fact impossible to sell 18-rated games in Australia. If anything acquired an 18+ rating, it was essentially banned from sale, which resulted in complete bans or otherwise neutered versions of games, including Left 4 Dead 2, the Australian version of which is quite frankly atrocious. Campaigners and activists have been pushing for the country to allow R18+ rated games for many years now, and only recently has that legislation been put into effect. Thankfully, this now hopefully means that Australia will not be having too many problems with acquiring brand new games, although the classification system up to this point seems to be fairly slow, with a fairly large backlog of games released previously that were not available in Australia, which now have to be re-rated. This, of course, includes Mortal Kombat and Left 4 Dead 2. I've got to say, the decision for this to be the second game on the list is a little bit odd, to say the least. This is a game that isn't out yet. In fact, it doesn't actually have a release date. It is based on the Stars series, which I've watched and is pretty fantastic if you're looking for something dumb and gory. And we know that it's going to allow you to play through a campaign as either Spartacus or Crixus, as well as create your own gladiator and do a whole career mode and things like that, which seems pretty fun, honestly, but it is a rather odd decision. I have to imagine that was influenced somewhat by the fact that this series is one of the most popular television exports to come out of Australia in the last couple of years, so I would imagine that's why it's getting priority over games that have already been released. One way or the other, though, it's good news for those in Australia, so it's hard to complain. In an interview which is no doubt going to get a lot of people really riled up because they didn't bother to read it, BioShock Infinite creator Ken Levine has gone on record to discuss the religious themes of the game and has stated that religious content within BioShock Infinite has been highly altered after feedback given from religious members of staff. Levine said that he had some very valuable conversations. One of the characters in the game was highly altered based upon some very interesting conversations I had with people on the team who came from a very religious background, and I was able to understand that they were kind of upset about something. What I said to them was, I'm not going to change anything to get your approval, but I think I can understand what you're saying, and I think I can do something that's going to make the story better based on what you've said. Knowing, naturally, that this will be a highly charged and fairly controversial discussion, he added that the last thing he wanted to do was change something because it offends somebody, but the thing they pointed out was making it a lesser story. And that's the key point, isn't it? That's what it's all about. When you try and tackle a complex subject and you don't approach it from the right angle, what you end up doing is ham-fisting it, and you don't necessarily offend people. I don't feel that a lot of gamers really get offended at much, honestly. But people do tend to get a little bit miffed if it's clear that you don't understand the subject but wanted to tackle it anyway out of some kind of misplaced idea that your story is more mature and more edgy than it really is. And if you happen to be a religious person, and then you happen to see some rather ridiculous views about religion portrayed in a video game, then you might get a little bit annoyed. Not just that, however, it can kind of ruin the story if you know much more than the game writers and creators do about a certain subject and you see them completely ham-fisted. That completely ruins the notion that you're trying to say something a little bit deeper than the norm. And when you're dealing with religion, you've got to do so in a very careful way. Now, I have a religious background. I'm not religious anymore, haven't been for quite some time, honestly. I'm not an atheist either, but I'm in a position where religion doesn't play any role in my life, and I don't believe that God or gods play any role in the everyday life on Earth either. So I guess that classifies me as either an agnostic or a deist, I'm not really sure which, but honestly, it doesn't matter. I find religion a very interesting topic because religion does a lot of things to people, some of which are very positive, some of which are highly negative, and that makes it a really interesting discussion. It's also a very interesting influence that can be used on a character. It's a very interesting part of a character's development, whether it be struggling with spirituality, doubt, faith, that kind of thing. That can be used to create a very interesting character and a very powerful story arc if it's handled correctly. There is also, of course, the potential to use religion as part of the antagonist's excuse for doing everything that he's doing, although the problem is, more often than not, it's used in a very lazy manner. It's very easy to excuse pretty much any action if all you say is, well, the antagonist believed it was the right thing to do because God. That's really boring. That's a very dull thing to do. It's a cop-out. It's a complete and total excuse. It's a really lame plot device. You have to explain why. What I find really interesting is when religion's integrated into games and they create an entirely new mythos surrounding it. I was actually very interested in the way that religion and spirituality operated within the original Dragon Age. I felt that they did that pretty damn well. That was intriguing to me. That was something I felt like I wanted to know more about. And whenever they do that really well, that really drags me into the story, and it can create some very powerful and interesting moments. But if you screw it up, then it does exactly the opposite. So I'm fairly confident that Ken Levine hasn't neutered the game. He hasn't censored the game. The interview clearly states that he hasn't. Admittedly, it all comes down to you as to whether or not you believe him. I mean, this is something that you would never readily admit to because you know what the gaming demographic is like. I mean, hell, you want to piss off Reddit? Mention that religious people got you to change stuff in your video game. That will be the top of Reddit in about 3 seconds. Include a cat in it, it'll get double karma. But from what he said, it would appear to me that people on staff have come to him, looked at parts of the game, being from a religious background, and come to him and said, you know what, this doesn't gel well with me. And it's even possible that they found it offensive just because of how wrong it was, and how obviously misguided a view it happened to be, in the way that it portrayed religion was just unrealistic. That's the biggest problem I've got. I don't mind when people portray religion as an evil thing in certain contexts. That's totally fine. I come from a religious background, but that doesn't mean that I'm blind to all of the evils religion has done in the past. But of course, there are good things that religion has done in the past as well, and it is a fundamental part of our growth as a race, and we can't simply ignore it. So I feel that if you're going to tackle it in video games, you best do it right. And if you do it right, then the chances are you're going to have a great story. It seems more often than not, however, that people just throw it into their game because it seems a little bit edgy and because they just want to push this ridiculous pseudo-intellectual agenda that, quite frankly, has no place in a video game. Hell, it would be laughed out of a high school debate club. A few days after launching the Kickstarter for their new action RPG Wildman, Gas Powered Games has announced that it has laid off a significant number of staff members, although they haven't confirmed exactly how many. Anonymous sources claim that almost the entire studio has been laid off, although Chris Taylor has yet to clarify as to whether or not that is the case. Chris Taylor created a video update for the Kickstarter campaign in which he stated that they'd laid off a significant number of staff and also explained the situation as being essentially gambling with the company and the livelihoods of everyone employed by them if he hadn't made the decision to cut some of the staff. What would have happened, he claimed, was if he had decided to keep them all on and the Kickstarter for Wildman had failed, which of course we don't know yet because it's currently on 25 days to go at $264,000 out of the 1.1 million goal, a fairly substantial goal indeed. Then he would have had to shut the entire company down, fire everybody, and not pay out severance, PTO, or anything along those lines. So according to him, it's a band-aid for the company. It was a decision that he had to make. It was either that or take an even bigger risk and be in a huge amount of trouble if it failed, as in company-killing trouble. He also asked the very odd question as to whether or not they should actually keep doing this Kickstarter in the first place. He was suggesting that maybe if it succeeded, he would be able to hire them back for the project, and hopefully then Wildman would be a success, or whether they should shut it down and simply restructure the campaign. In an interview with Gama Sutra, Taylor explained that the studio is still operating, but we had to slim way down to conserve cash reserves. We spent all the last dough that we've had and the last several months working on it, so we are betting the company on it, that of course being the Wildman game. Taylor also claimed that the studio was in the process of transitioning through to a new business model. As to what that would be is really anyone's guess at this point. Well, this is a really awkward situation, isn't it? A very, very odd one indeed. This is unique, certainly. This is a case of a Kickstarter very much being required in order to save a company, and yet this Kickstarter going on only a few days before this was all going to happen. And this is what makes me step back and stroke my beard just a little and say, hang on a second, how could you not have known? Generally speaking, these things simply do not creep up on you overnight. You know for a while. So this Kickstarter went live with the full knowledge that there would be layoffs almost immediately following its launch. There is no way they couldn't have known. And there was no possibility that this would not have happened. This thing wasn't going to raise $1.1 million in a day and suddenly everyone go crazy on it. It looks like an interesting game, honestly. It's an action RPG, it's set in sort of caveman era, prehistoric times, and there's an evolution element to it, and all sorts of interesting stuff. I mean, this looks pretty cool, honestly. It looks like the kind of thing that I would back. But it does give me serious reservations when this kind of thing occurs. I'm also looking at the numbers, and once again, I'm scratching my head. Does this actually work out? How large was the Gas Powered Games team that was going to be working on this? Gas Powered Games was a fairly large developer. I mean, these are the guys that made Supreme Commander. They weren't exactly a 10-man indie team. So I have to wonder, is 1.1 million actually enough to release this? They were looking at a release of March 2014. So you're looking at having already developed the game for a few months, being able to actually show a video prototype, and then 15-month development cycle. And 1.1 million funds this after you've said that you spent your last penny. So they have no more money, apparently. According to Chris Taylor, if we're to believe him there. Is 1.1 million enough to sustain that studio for a year? Honestly, probably not. I really don't think that it would be. 1.1 million sounds like a lot of money until you start factoring in if the studio consisted of 20 people only being paid $50,000 a year, which is a rubbish salary, I might add, for a higher-end developer. If you're only being paid $50K a year when you're developing software for a reasonable-sized company, then chances are you're not really doing all that well for yourself. Only then is that 1.1 million number actually feasible? And we know for a fact it's not, because you're going to pay for office space, equipment, utilities, and there's blatantly going to be more than 20 people working on this. Honestly, I don't see how there could be. I want to know exactly what this money pays for, and this is a thing that I've been pushing for on Kickstarter for a long time. I want to see full transparency. I want to know exactly how much the bloody thing costs, because there's an awful lot of games that end up on Kickstarter, or hardware projects, some of these are even worse, that seem to have blatantly unrealistic money values attached to them. And when you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you think, hang on a second, how the hell can you afford this? We're not talking about 3 students working on a project here. We're talking about gas-powered freaking games. The guys that did Age of Empires Online. The guys that did Supreme Commander. This is not some small indie team we're talking about here. So this story is unfortunate, it really is. Gas Powered Games has made games which I very much enjoy. It's also made some that I didn't enjoy, but hey, that's every developer ever, right? So, I want to hear more. It's interesting to watch Chris Taylor talk for 2 minutes about gambling the company and things like that, but I want to see hard numbers. I really, really do. How many people were laid off? How many people do they currently have? Can they make the game with the team that they have remaining? What is this business model they're transitioning over to? What does $1.1 million actually pay for? At the moment, this is trending to meet that goal. And after all of this extra exposure, it probably will. But unfortunately, because we're not getting all of this extra information, and I feel we need extra transparency if the company's in trouble, why would we throw money at something which might not even get made because the studio might shut down tomorrow? Why would we do that? That's just foolish. That's ridiculous. We need to know everything. And that is what Gas Powered Games' next move should be. Put it all on the table, and then let people decide. Riot Games has announced a ban for 2 League of Legends pro players that were attempting to qualify for the League of Legends Championship Series after repeated violations of the so-called Summoner's Code, which is of course a list of rules and guidelines as to how to behave properly while playing League of Legends. The 2 players in question are Mousesports Envision and Against All Authorities Linak. The rather wonderfully named Biting Pig, the senior esports manager over at Riot, gave a fairly lengthy description as to why they came to the decision on each of these 2 players. He described Envision as having no less than 18 punishments across multiple other accounts, resulting in 2 additional bans for different Smurf accounts, as well as 5 tribunal punishments on his main account, which establishes an undeniable record of in-game harassment. 70% of the reports were for offensive language, verbal abuse, and negative attitude. According to the ruling, Envision had been reported in 29% of total matches played, which is a rate 6 times greater than the average EU player. In a rather hilarious, if shocking statistic, one of his earlier accounts, Jungle Reject, received 436 reports in 135 games, and his account Shukal 2 registered one of the highest harassment scores ever recorded on League of Legends. As a direct result, both of these players have been banned from participation in the Warsaw qualifier for Season 3, as well as the Championship Series for a period of 1 year. This is not the first time that we've seen punishments laid out by Riot when it comes to dealing with League of Legends pro gamers and streamers, but I think this is one of the most obvious examples of something which is really hard to argue against. Incredibly hard to argue against. Now, I think the last time I talked about this was, I think it was one of the Curse players ended up getting suspended for a while because he was doing some stuff on stream that was considered to be against the Summoner's Code. Riot believed that if you're a high-profile player representing the game, then you shouldn't be acting that way and decided to take matters into their own hands. Now, if I recall correctly, back in that episode, I think it was a mailbox episode I talked about this in, I said that if you happen to be making a lot of money from a particular game, then yes, you are representing the game, and as a result, you are pretty much required to behave in a reasonable manner. Everyone rages out every now and again. Everybody makes mistakes, but when you get 436 reports in 135 games, you're definitely doing something very, very wrong indeed. And in this case, I feel that they are absolutely justified. Why would they be absolutely justified? Because it's their tournament. They're the ones sponsoring it. They're throwing a ton of money into this thing. They're spending more money than I've seen any individual game throw at esports in a very, very long time indeed. It's an absurd amount of money. And they have the right to stop certain players from participating if these players are nothing more than ladder scum. League of Legends and most MOBAs, in fact, are very toxic communities. The last thing you want is a pro player leading the charge in that regard, and Riot certainly doesn't want somebody essentially on their payroll. Bear in mind that the top teams in LCS actually get salaried by Riot. It goes that far. So there's no way in a million years that Riot would actually want a player like that being directly paid by them, or indeed representing them in competitions. I wonder if this should apply to other games, is probably something that's swimming through your mind right now, and some of the others amongst you, the more critical, might be saying, oh, well, why don't you think about this for StarCraft 2? Look at all of that stuff. Well, there are a couple of players in StarCraft 2 that probably deserve similar treatment, but bear in mind that Blizzard doesn't actually run all that many tournaments. They ran the World Championship Series, WCS, and that was pretty much it. Everything else, like MLG, NASL, IEM, DreamHack, and all sorts of other tournaments, these are run by independent entities, and it's not necessarily their business as to whether or not the players that end up qualifying or getting invited have ladder rage or whatever. If you were to look at a player like Idra, if you were to look at a player like Combat EX is probably the biggest example of a player that's actually been on a big stage and yet has had a consistent history of trolling and bad manner when it comes to his streams and on ladder. Combat EX, funnily enough, is actually a little bit of a redemption story because he ended up on stage at WCG, the Grand Finals. For some inexplicable reason, he managed to qualify as Canada's representative and then actually beat the crap out of his group and took a map from Parting, one of the best players in the world. And even after all of that BM, it's very, very hard to look at Combat EX and say, I hate you. Because if you were to look at the way that he played and the way that he acted in that tournament, which was respectful and, oddly enough, actually skillful, then you can't really argue with that. It is possible to redeem yourself, but In this case, Riot's running the tournament. It's Riot's show, it's Riot money. They can ban whoever the damn well hell they please. And in this case, it seems like their decision was absolutely justified, and I applaud them for that. That's good. Here's the thing. If you're in our industry, if you happen to be a commentator, if you happen to be a critic, a reviewer, or in this case a pro gamer, you're in a pretty privileged position. You get to do things that a lot of people really aspire to do. Lots of teenagers come and say, oh, it'd be great to be a pro gamer, being paid for video games sounds amazing. And yeah, it kind of is. You know, I wouldn't trade this job for the world. But unfortunately for you, that means that you've also got some responsibilities. You have to actually act like a reasonable human being. Otherwise, you'll rapidly find yourself kicked the hell out. And with good reason. No one's gonna feel sympathy for you. People want every opportunity they can to tear you down. And this is a great reason for doing so. This isn't pitchforks. This is absolutely justified. Alright, folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch, and I will see you next time.